All right, so the great session we had right before this one was um, about Monkey Report, which is we kind of it's not. I don't like to think of Monkey Report and Monkey as being part of MDS, but rather we provide an easy way to install it as well as be able to host it. So there's a web server that runs. And what we really want to do with MDS is make a kind of a modern open source server for helping you deploy Macs. We'll talk a little bit about workflows specifically on the M1s, but it does include all the tools that you would need in open source to be able to do everything from MDM, DEP, Auto Advance to inventory with Monkey Report to package management with Monkey. It is interoperable with everything else you have. So if you want to use Jamf or Mosel as your MDM, or you want to use the inventory or self-service portal as part of that and just use MDS for deploying workflows, you can do that as well. So it's the idea is that you can interchange these pieces. But let's talk about what we're all here for today is the Apple Silicon Macs, the new M1 Macs. So I'll start off with a demo. So I boot into recovery on an M1, and to run the workflows, I'll go up to the menu and choose terminal, and I'll run the single terminal command you have to run, which is /volume/MDS/run, and that will run our new workflow runner, which is called MDS Deploy. I ported the functionality of Imager over at Apple Silicon and gave it a fresh new UI, and I would basically select the partition and the workflow I want to run. And since this is on M1 Mac, first thing it does, it copies the installer over to the target partition. It doesn't have to do this, but that means that you can unplug the external drive or eject the disk image before and move on to another machine if you want. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So it copies the installer over to the target, then it installs a launch daemon, all your packages. And MDS is not really it's an automation tool, but it also is a repackaging tool. So I'll talk about that too. On the M1s, it does require you to open up the installer and then click through the 4 buttons on the installer. We can't use Start OS Install anymore on Apple Silicon. But the important part about this, even though it is manual at this beginning, you are running the installer that's on the target volume. So it says 58 minutes. That's actually not true. It takes about 8 minutes to run because it doesn't have to download that installer. So once again, another progress bar that lies to you. So it downloads that and starts it running, and you can walk away from it. And at this point, when you walk back, the machine will be 100% set up. You'll be at the login window if you skipped Setup Assistant or you went through the DEP enrollment. You'll be at the Setup Assistant, at the login window. Or if you did Create User and skip Setup Assistant, or you'll be at the Setup Assistant window if you didn't skip that. So the idea is that when you're doing it manually, it takes about 4 minutes. So let me talk about how we set this up, and here's what MDS4 looks like for the for workflow that's either Intel or M1. So I have a workflow called Pico. I'll go in and I'll edit it. And it is a very nice workflow, kind of give a description and a name. We can now limit it to just certain Mac models. You select the installer that you want, and then you can say erase it. And you can also have options if it's fresh out of the box to not install the OS. We can also install packages and apps, scripts. Here I'm going to move Photoshop in and install it. After the Mac OS installation, I can create a user, and that user can be hidden. It can be admin. You have all the different options you want. You even provide an SSH key if you're doing this for CI/CD servers, and you want to be able to SSH in or anything. You can set the Wi-Fi network so it joins the network as soon as it's done. Use variable substitution for the computer name. Skip the Setup Assistant. Turn on SSH. And the set variables one is I love that one really well because you can provide prompts for your own scripts. We provide micro MDM as part of MDS, as well as being able to configure automatons, make bootable installers. And this one's great for the download Mac OS is great because you can even download the latest version of Mac OS 12 just by selecting it. And it uses the install Mac OS from Greg Nagel. to query the catalogs and show them to you and allow you to download. So we have people that use MDS specifically just for this feature to be able to download the macOS versions. And it does allow you to choose different catalogs. So that's how I downloaded the latest version of the beta. I just went to here and downloaded it. So this allows you to very easily grab them. And the nice thing about the macOS installers that you download, you can provide those as part of the workflows. And they put them in a DMG. But the best thing I like about the disk image is that it names them what version and build it is. So I tend to download a lot of macOS images or installers, and this helps me keep them organized so I know exactly which one it has because it names them correctly. So let's talk about what actually I did during all that. So this is a way that to do automated Apple Silicon deployment, to move all that work up front to the technician is you boot in recovery by holding down the power button. So this is going into one true recovery. So you press and hold. The screen says to open, continue to hold for startup options. You select options. Then you run that command that I showed you. And then you erase the Mac if you need to. If you're not reinstalling the OS, you don't have to do that. If you do choose to erase the Mac, it reboots and puts you right back into recovery to activate, and then you run that command again. And so the Mac is completely erased. And that sounds like it takes a long time, but it takes less than a minute to be able to do that reboot. It actually takes longer to activate than to erase the Mac, which is kind of interesting. At that point, like I mentioned, the installer, the packages, scripts, and settings all get copied over. The launch daemon is copied to the target drive, and then the installer launches. And what happens there is the installer puts all the files in, and after it finishes installing, that launch daemon and packages are still in that location that you copied it to. And when the machine comes up, it'll install all those packages and configure that machine. So it's even on a new drive, it's doing kind of a migrate, which is basically allows to keep those packages on the disk, which is great. So the installer is what's controlled by that. I wish we could programmatically launch the installer, but you can't get much closer to how Apple recommends doing it than this, because you use the macOS installer, and even running the installer from the recovery partition is in a KBase about how to recover your M1 Mac if you're having issues. So that's even referenced somewhere. So the MDS flow is pretty close to what Apple is. It's kind of an automated way of doing what Apple recommends. So there's some differences between Apple Silicon and Intel. So you can't run StartOS install in the recovery. You have to use the GUI installer. You can run StartOS install from a booted OS, but you have to pass the username and password. And we gave up on that earlier on because really one of the things we wanted is parity with the Intel workflows, and be able to walk up to any machine, spend as little time as you want as you can in front of it, and have that machine go to a known state. You can't go into disk utility and recovery and just erase the volume. You have to actually erase the Mac. If you just erase the volume, you'd think that would be fine, but that doesn't delete the activation record, which means you get into this secure token installer gets angry at you kind of state. So erasing it is really easy, but does require a reboot. And you can't automate booting for recovery, and by that I mean the bless command no longer works. That one was kind of ripped from our hands a while ago with SIP, but now it's, I guess, a hardware directly talking to the, the SEP system on a chip to boot it up. So you have to hold the power button down. But that doesn't mean we can't automate the crap out of all the other stuff. So in order to automate this and to set up a Mac, so there's been like discussions, and one of the people that are new to MDS, they think it's like, why do I need MDS? We have all of this through the device enrollment as well as through MDM. So why don't I just use that, right? Because that'll get you a fully configured Mac. And so that's really the goal is what we want is a Mac that's when is it usable? So I've actually gone through this with onboarding for a couple of different companies, and when you get your Mac, it's enrolled in DEP, and you want to have the most recent OS version. So if it's drop shipped directly from Apple,
DEP works great, enrolls in MDM, but the OS version may be a minor release behind or a major release behind, depending on when they're shipping it and how long it's been in the factory or in the warehouses. And then the required software has to be installed, and settings and management user accounts. If all those things are done, that means the machine's ready to be used. It's not ready to be used when you first turn it on and do Wi-Fi if it asks you to create your own account, update the macOS version, and install software. That may take a few minutes or it may take a long time, depending on how much you have to download. So I don't consider, and for this, the reason for MDS existing is that it is not a fully configured machine until all these things have been done. And so I split this up into two basic methodology or two different situations. One is the out-of-box deployment. You have a new Mac and you want to set it up. And if you do it with just DEP and MDM, and I know that DEP is no longer the politically correct terminology, but I love it and I'm going to hug it and hold it onto it. So DEP is just, when I say DEP, just think Macs enrolled in Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. It's just a shorter way of saying that. And so if we have this situation, the Mac, the installed OS is right there. The machine is drop shipped to the person. They enroll in MDM with minimal user interaction. So they just go through those, join Wi-Fi, say, hey, I want to enroll in remote management or allow remote management. Then the MDM agent is installed. It starts installing software. There's some ways to put up prompts to say, software is being installed. And then software update may kick in. Can take, now that the OS updates are on the slightly larger size. So our last 10.4, I think, was a small 11 gigabyte software update. So that can take a little bit of time to update. And so it requires MDM, DEP, network, and time. And the reason I highlight network and time is because those two are very tightly coupled, right? And if you have a slower network, so if you pick up a new machine you're just onboarding on a company and you go to the Starbucks and you're trying to set it up, their Wi-Fi network maybe will not allow you to download the Creative Suite very quickly to that laptop. But there's a huge benefit. You don't have to have a minimal IT involvement. And so this is like, when I say zero touch, it's really minimal zero. It's zero IT touch, but the user has to go through and click through these things and then wait. And so minimal or zero touch means you're trading off touching for IT touching for the user touching in a little bit of time or a lot of time, depending on the speed. And so the big drawback is the user needs to wait for the Mac to finish setting up. So let's talk about when you add MDS into the mix of this. So you can optionally wipe and install the required OS version. You can use the OS that's on there, but like I said, one of the tenets of MDS is that you don't have to care what's on there. You're going to nuke and pave, and so it'll install the most recent or the OS version that you specified on that machine. So that's that. You don't have to do that. If you just order a bunch of Macs and they all came back they ship with 11.4 and you're fine with that, and you're going to push out any security updates later on, or there is none, that's fine. But most of the time, you're not exactly sure what state these machines are in when you get them or what version of the OS. So it might be an install. Like I said, it only adds in, the whole process takes about 8 minutes, so it doesn't add a huge amount. MDS will, when you run the workflow, it'll install the required software, then it'll enroll in MDM with DEP. And so this requires the tech to touch it, and also MDM and DEP, because you want those for ongoing management. And what you have is now when the user gets it and they go to that Starbucks to use it, they literally just join the Wi-Fi network and sign in with their credentials that you've given them before, and they're ready to go. All software's installed, VPN's installed, it's the most recent version of the OS, so it's ready to go from the moment the user walks up to it. And the drawback to that is you have to touch it ahead of time. So MDS allows you to do that, initial touch, but having a fully configured Mac when you do it, when you get it, when you're ready to go. So now let's talk about the second scenario, is redeployment. So redeployment is if you have a Mac you've deployed this to your workforce, and now you want to give them a new Mac. So you have an M1 that you need to do something with. So let's look at the DEP and MDM workflow. You can either do Apple Configurator 2, where you use that
shortcut with the right USB port and cable plugged into another Mac, and then use Apple Configurator 2, and that takes a short period of time. I believe when I timed it, it takes about 4 minutes. It does require additional Mac and a cable to do it. You can also go to erase the Mac in One True Recovery and then reinstall manually. Or you can send the Start OS install sent to the booted Mac. And this is what when I talk to folks like with MDM, how do they do this? It's the way that is soon to be done is if the machine is either sitting on the person's desk and they send the command, and then it chunks around there and reinstalls everything again, and it's ready to go. Then they send it back to IT to repurpose, but then IT doesn't know what state it's in because, everything comes back variable. Or IT has to get it and they have to set it up and send the Start OS command. And with the M1s, it requires you to have a known admin account. So there's some drawbacks to for me, it's like you spend a lot of cognitive time trying to figure out, is this in the right state? It's much easier just to boot up the machine and have that special spicy sauce of MDS on top of it. And so, like we said, this process, I'm not going to go through it. It's exactly the same as what we had before, right? You just run the same exact workflow. It installs it, puts it, it's ready to go. It's enrolled in MDM. And all the software is ready to go on it. So what that means is that's now a lot faster, right? So that because the amount of time is not the user's time anymore, you're on a fast network because you're setting it up. So if you do erase and install, the amount of time the technician's in front of it to erase it, then run that command is about 4 minutes. If you use the existing OS, you don't have to do that extra reboot, so it takes about 2 minutes. Unintended time takes about 18 minutes because it has to install the OS and it has to install the packages. If you're using the existing OS, it's just the package install, so it takes about 1 minute. So that takes about 22 minutes per machine, but really the focus for most of the people using MDS, the focus is the 4 minutes of interactive time in front of it. And then the MDM setup times, if we were used to MDM, and this is really like people say, why? This is my answer to why do you need to use MDS with MDM? And so the setup assist, the user gets a new machine, takes about 5 minutes to join the Wi-Fi network, create the user account, answer the privacy questions, and so I can give 5 minutes. Then you have to, once that's done, it has to download the agent, the software, and the settings. It depends on maybe you just have, Firefox that you download. Chrome would be a little bit more. Depends on their network. Then you have to update the OS, and that can take 1 minute to, if you're on a slow network. I've had it to where I haven't been able to install an OS for a couple of days because I've rebooted and done some things on that. So when you do this math, 5 minutes plus 1 to lots plus 1 to lots, the total time is, I don't know. I have no idea how long this takes. This is not a defined number. It's really dependent on the user, and it's dependent on the network, and it's dependent on the DEP enrollment, right? Because if they don't get enrolled, they don't get the agent, the software doesn't get installed. And multiple times I've gone through this with folks. There is a IT setup time where they make sure all this stuff happens with DEP. So it's more almost the same amount of time it would take to set it up yourself, right? So you have to provide that hand-holding support either way. But that's not good enough. I do not accept 4 minutes. 4 minutes is unacceptable, right? I want this to be faster, right? So that's why we updated the MDS Automaton for Apple Silicon. And if you don't know what the MDS Automaton is, it's a little Arduino device that acts like a little keyboard. That we can programmatically control it. And what that does is, imagine it's like a little robot inside, with a little keyboard inside this little device that you plug in. And it does all those steps I showed you. Everything from erasing it, to activating it, joining Wi-Fi, running the workflow, or kicking off the workflow, walking through the installer. So you don't really have to do anything. You just do it, and then you move on to the next. You just plug it in, power on the machine, and move on to the next Mac. So the question is how long does that take? So we said, Tim, it took 4 minutes to do it before. If you save me 50% of the time, I'm down to 2 minutes. 1 minute, that seems impossible, right? 1 minute per machine. But what it ends up taking 7 seconds, right? The amount of time to boot up to One True Recovery and plug in a USB device. you're going to spend more time putting an asset tag on it than you are with tech time in front of it, right? So if you just go through, plug in the automaton, move on next, 7 seconds to set up a Mac. So Tim, this is impossible. What is this ridiculous? 7 seconds? That's almost no time at all. You can't drink a cup of coffee in 7 seconds. Well, not a hot cup of coffee anyways. So how does it work? It automates using keystrokes and communication via USB serial. This is what's really different with the way we did the Apple Silicon is now we have, because we're going back to the installer, you're going back to the installer, it can communicate back to the automaton. So there's a two-way communication. So what happens is it boots up, the automaton chooses the options. You have to hold the power button and plug it in, right? And at that point, the automaton takes over, selects options, it boots in recovery, opens up terminal, runs that command to kick off the MDS deploy, and it communicates with the automaton and says, hey, this drive needs to be erased because that's what my workflow says. So at that point, it launches the reset password, erase disk, walks through all those options, sets the automaton to reactivate on reboot, reboots the machine, reruns the workflow or MDS deploy, and at that point, launch the installer and continues onward. So it's very much interactive, which makes this highly reliable. So there's a caveat, as you saw in the other charts. So it's 7 seconds, but it takes about 18 minutes of it running unattended, right? So you have to set it off to the side. So it's not 18 minutes, it's not 7 seconds, and the user can start using it. But really what you're doing is you're only spending, the important time is the time that you spend in front of it. So let me talk about how you would kind of deploy a bunch. And we've seen kind of what people do, a rolling deployment of it. So you got a tech that comes up that walks into a room with 1,000 Macs in it, and they want to set them up. So they set up, there's 5 Macs they set up. They plug in the automaton Ethernet because fast network's good, and then they might have an external drive. Depending on if you want to use the network or not. And we'll talk about that in a second. That then installs the packages and the OS over to it. You've, of course, bought 5 automatons, and you have 5 thumb drives, or you're mounting a disk image with the resources. You get those all plugged in. By the time you get to the 5th one, the first one has chimed and it's installing. And since the installer's already copied over, you can go ahead and unplug that one and set up the 6th one. And you can move over that MDS automaton and the other tools like the external drive if you want to, and the Ethernet dongle if you want. Well, I think Ethernet dongle you want to leave plugged in because it does that downloading of firmware. Anyways, you plug in Ethernet to be able to do that. So those first 5 are chunking away. This other one, you go through the same setup, and then you go on to the next row. And so it takes about 18 minutes. And the cool thing is that once you're done, it's done, right? The machine is either shut down or you do a final verification by just a visual verification, and you close it and pack it up in the box and send it out. And you know with 100% confidence that machine is ready to go when the user turns it on, which is a very nice, warm feeling that all IT people should experience. All right, so before I go into more stuff about MDS, some features, I want to open up for any questions. I see there's some discussion in the channel, but if folks want to unmute and ask any questions about Apple Silicon and deploying with MDS, or type them into the demo MDS on M1 Macs, I'd be happy to answer them. And I will not continue until at least 3 questions have been asked, because I can't do this alone. I just can't.
This is not an Apple Silicon question, but if you're using micro MDM, does that require some sort of special developer account or fee payment in order to get the legal work done?
So you do, it does require the Apple push certificate for MDM, and you can import, if you have one of those, you can import that directly in MDS. If you have a support contract with us, that comes with it as well, and that is a yearly payment. You can also import it from Profile Manager. So I don't recommend that one necessarily for ongoing because of the way you have to keep one around to be able to renew that. But if you want to do some testing, you can just grab that certificate right from the keychain and import it. But if you, like I said, because we have to have, Apple requires an existing relationship to be able to give somebody a push notification or APNS certificate. So you have to buy one of our support plans. But I'll talk about support later, but it does require, it helps support the project, and you get escalated feature requests, which is always a bonus. That answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay, the question, will I stop hearing Mac OS contains a built-in screen reader called VoiceOver? Yes, because your brain will adapt to it and you will no longer hear it. It'll become musical to your ears. I have looked at changing the sound to volume to 0, but I was only half joking about your brain getting used to it. When I'm setting up a bunch of Macs, I see when I get to that point and I hear the clicks, I can see it progressing. So it's a great audio way to know the progression of these things moving forward. So I kind of like it, even though it drives you insane. All right. Can we all get it in a web browser MDS as a service? That comes from Matt X, long-time listener, long-time caller. No, a web browser. You mean have a cloud-hosted version of MDS? I don't know. The whole model would have to change. I think there's a lot of MDM vendors out there. The problem with running MDS in the cloud is that it would require fees, and then I would just be another MDM vendor. Who wants that? All right. Another question. We'd like to give external disk configured for file vault encryption with our deployed Macs. Currently, there's a lot of manual work involved. How would you automate that bit in any way, including MDS? And you can, Robin asks us. Okay. So turning on file vault encryption, I believe that can be a setting with MDM to be able to do it. But if you want to do it manually, we can automate it. One of the cool things about the Automaton, it has a full command line interface. So if you hook up a serial reader to it or use the screen command, you can type help and it will give you all the commands. And that's how it does two-way communications. And so we have automations for things like all the things I talked about that restarted, like the installer or erasing it, are just commands that you send over the serial port. So we could build in a file vault configure command, and then whenever you want to do that, either through a launch agent or whatever through a command on the terminal, you just say go, and all of a sudden the automaton will take over the keyboard, open up system preferences, turn on file vault, and all those different steps. So that's one of the things that's kind of new with MDS4 is before it was kind of the automaton it would run and then it would wait. Now it's more interactive. You can give it a command and it'll do those like modules, those subsections, and do those interactions, which is kind of cool. So hopefully, Robin, that answered your question. Does the automaton recognize Silicon versus Intel with a hybrid fleet? No. So that's currently can't recognize it. I've tried having it look at the serial or looking at the serial port to see if I can tell what kind of Mac it's plugged into. I'm still hopeful that I can do that, but the way USB works, it's really about the host device learning what the peripheral is, not the other way around. But if there's a way to do it, that would be great, and I could do that. But right now, you have to set up the automaton to say either it's a Intel Mac or it's a M1 Mac, and you have to decide, is it have file vault on or not? Because the interaction is a little bit different. But I figured that if people buy enough automatons, I'll get a yacht that has another yacht, just like Jeff Bezos. So that's what I'm hoping if we sell enough of these automatons. So it's a stretch goal. I will admit that. But having a yacht that has another yacht, that's a lot of yacht. Okay. Couple more questions before I go on. If you capture the firewall key, we might be very interested to send support money. Oh, okay, we need to talk, Robin. We need to talk. There's support money involved.
I'm curious to see special tricks that others or yourself have implemented with custom variables. Please join us in the Slack channel on MacAdmin Slack, and we'll be more than happy to talk about that. Custom variables is very cool because you can prompt, basically you give it a question, and then that answer is passed to your script. So you can say, what subnet are you on? What building are you in? And this all started with, can you add this to the interface? I want to prompt for not just computer name, but also asset tag or this or that. So I said, I'm just going to give a way to arbitrarily prompt and then pass it to your own scripts. And so you can do some really interesting things. So another question is, what's the relationship with micro MDM? Can we use MDS with a different MDM? Well, yes, you can. That's probably the most common one, is that using it with Jamf or Mosel or Simple MDM, it works with all the different vendors. So enrollment is the trick. And so before Big Sur, we used to be able to use the profiles command. Now it's really all about DEP, which was painful, but when Apple's announcement, which I'm not allowed to talk about, but there are some exciting things around Apple Configurator and enrolling non-enrolled Macs. And also a follow-up question, how is config managed? Use case would be to give Autonomons to our warehouse and make updated changes to configuration so we can manage the config remotely. We will be talking about that. That's save master image, and syncing is all part of it. All right. Okay, let's move on to the presentation. We'll circle back. All right, so let's talk about how to actually have these resources. So I said there's two different ways to do this. You can actually have all your packages and your installer and all the scripts and configuration are all packaged up for you through MDS. You can either have that on an external drive. This is just a flash drive that's formatted as HFS Plus usually, because that's Apple's installer usually likes that. We have external drives. Or you can take that and you can save it to a disk image and put that on a web server. And MDS has a built-in web server, which is the built-in Apache and macOS, but puts a front end to it and allows you to share that disk image out. And when you mount it, it's literally the exact same thing as plugging that drive in. It'll look exactly the same. You'll have a run command, you'll have a deploy folder, you'll have the installer, and the packages all in it. It's just a way to do it. It is a little bit slower because it's using the network instead of a drive. But what I found is it's pretty not material. It's a couple more minutes per machine, and it's a couple of non-important minutes because it's not your minutes. This is not your minutes in front of the machine. This is just the copying time to do it. So it just means you need a larger room to spread more of these out as they're setting themselves up. But if you want to, the nice thing about the external drives is you can put it on your text keychains or around their neck with their lanyards. And you just plug it in and be able to reset it. And so they always have that one no matter what machine they walk up to, and it doesn't require network connectivity. We actually have already seen folks that use a disk image that's mounted or that's available on the open internet through a secret URL, and then they tell their folks, oh, if you're having trouble with your Mac, boot in recovery, run this command, and MDS takes over, wipes the Mac, and reinstalls the OS and all the packages. So it's a great way to provide this capability externally vetted. And so we can either save it either way, where you can save it, the disk image to local folder and do it right from MDS, and then mount on the client and run the workflow. So it's exactly the same as we had before. I wanted to include all the different aspects you would have so you could pick and choose depending on what MDM vendor you're using or not, or if you're using Monkey. And I also wanted to reduce the barriers to kind of kicking the tires and trying out Monkey and Monkey Report. So Monkey is it doesn't have a UI to it. It's not like it's an app you run or a web service. It's more about managing files in a web server through the command line. And so I wanted a way to easily set up Monkey and get started. So you can, I wouldn't recommend using Monkey as part of MDS for 10,000 machines, but if you have a couple dozen or a couple hundred Macs, it would work just fine to be able to do it that way. And so it's a great way to either in your test bed or in a smaller deployment to do it, and then graduate to a larger deployment through maybe distributed web services or something like that.
but it's a great way to do it. And one of the nice things about MDS is it will tell you when you have a new version of Monkey to update it. So you can see here is an example of it's requiring the updates. We include Monkey Report is the same thing where it sets it up as a web service. It's a little bit different than Monkey. Monkey's more about configuration files on a web server, whereas Monkey Report is an actual PHP app that's running is part of it. So we set up the web server to support that for PHP and to be able to have that initial user. So just with a couple of clicks, installer and a couple of clicks, you're at the website and you're starting to manage your machines. And then with a couple more clicks, or just a part of the workflow, they're enrolled in Monkey and Monkey Report. And you'll see the managed software center as well as the machines appear in Monkey Report to start doing inventory. So the idea is that you can get up and running really fast without having to do a lot of investment in your time. So the MDM service, it is based on micro MDM. It doesn't have it's not viewed as a replacement for a cloud MDM, and it's not MDM for iOS devices. But really what it is geared towards is folks that want to set up their Macs very quickly and doing some either light management or no management on them once they're deployed. So we do have some MDM commands where you can reboot the machine, you can push out a package, you can push out a profile, stuff like that. But there's not things like smart groups and triggers and that kind of stuff. But this is really for I'm deploying Macs and I need a way to be able to do this specific thing that only MDM does, and that's why micro MDM is part of MDS. If you're looking for a more full-featured MDM, I would use MDM a cloud MDM in conjunction with MDS. All right, so one of the things that's exciting about Big Sur was Auto Advance. And so I don't know if folks have seen Auto Advance, but I saw it at WWC last year, and I'd never tried it. And then I went out and I asked people, have you done it? And everyone I knew seemed to know somebody that did it, but nobody had done it directly. So I was worried that it was actually not a real thing, but it was like aliens or UFOs, which of course have been confirmed as being real. But let's see. So I did it, and this is what it looks like for those who haven't seen that. It basically just steps through all the different ones, all the different setup assistant through once it's enrolled in DEP and goes to the SEP assistant. It pauses for about a minute and then walks through the setup assistant and gets right to the login window. And this is for me the holy grail for machines that are unattended that you want to refresh or you want to completely wipe and reset up or just plug in to install. So this is for places with CI/CD servers or lab machines or something like that. You want to be able to do it without touching them. And that works great. So the whole zero touch before was when I said before, it's you're switching off time and IT touches. But this isn't that. This is actual, IT doesn't have to touch it and it walks through it. It doesn't completely replace the user setup. This is more for unattended machines to be able to walk all the way through it and be able to set it up. It can do for individual users, but for me, it's kind of that's the setup assistant gives them allow to customize some of their environments, whereas something like a lab machine or a workstation that's or a CI/CD server, all those things ahead of time. So AutoAdvance is an amazing thing, and it worked really well. What I did find is that if you delete, this is so fun, if you delete the Apple setup done and you have DEP and AutoAdvance, it'll AutoAdvance through it again. So it's a great way to test it. You just boot to recovery, delete the Apple setup done, boot back into it. And actually, you don't even need to do that. You just log in as the user and then delete that Apple setup done, reboot, and then walk through it again. So it's a great way to test to make sure that your AutoAdvance is working. So that's, for me, it's a great way to automate those machines. And we built it in. It's not really built. It is built into MDS in terms of we have a single checkbox that says, don't, instead of skipping these panes, the setup assistant panes that are steps, to just use AutoAdvance. And that puts it in that initial profile that's sent down to the machine. So it has to be hinged on with the device enrollment. But you can use that with another MDM or
with MDS. But as I mentioned before, there's this syncing from remote locations, and so this came about because people wanted to be able to share their workflows and their resources to do. So you want to be able to keep all your resources in sync. So you can share workflows now, but the workflows are only the settings. It doesn't have like the installer, it doesn't have the packages that are part of them. And folks want a way to package up all of the resources at once and share it with somebody else. So when you're in MDS, you would just choose create, you would go in and you would create the master workflow. And that's just like creating a workflow, putting in Photoshop, putting in Firefox and Chrome, saving it, and testing it. And then when you got it all set up and it's right, you may have 2 or 3 workflows that these are like the blessed ones, the blessed workflows. You go up to the file menu and choose save master to disk image. And at that point, what MDS does is it takes the workflows and it collects all the resources, no matter where they are on the hard drive or in folders, whatever, and puts them all together on a disk image. And then you copy that to a web server. And then then you pass the URL to that web server, to the disk image, to somebody that has MDS. And they add that to their version of MDS, and they click on sync. When it does that, it pulls down not only the workflows, but all the resources and links them up correctly. And it makes them read-only so that they can't change those workflows. Only you can change the workflows by changing those. But what they can do is they can duplicate the workflow and then make their own modifications to it. So it's a kind of a read-only version of it, but allows them the flexibility to make their own customization. So this shows the save master for syncing, where it collects up all these resources for you. And then with the actual syncing inside of preferences, you add in the URL. I'm actually using a local path here, which you can do if you want to just do the disk image, or it can be HTTP or HTTPS, and then you can sync. And under the hood, it uses rsync to do it, so it's fast. So it looks to see if there's any. I can't remember if I used rsync or do I sync myself. Anyways, it uses syncing to look at the resources to make sure they're not the same. So it can be very fast if it's just a small change. And so it's one thing I want to point out is that MDS is free. There is no per license client license. The software itself is in a Bitbucket repository. Go Australia for Bitbucket. And the hardware itself is open source as well. It's even down to the point where we source the Itsy Bitsies from Adafruit. That's an open source design. If you want to build the circuit boards yourself, you could. If you want to go out and buy the Itsy Bitsies from Adafruit, put our firmware on it, you can do that. Or you can buy it from us, where we have everything in a nice 3D enclosure with a USB cable and the firmware flashed on it already. So it's up to you. We do have support contracts as well, that if you want to support the project, get that MDM certificate or the MDM push certificate, and get one of the nice things is if you are a supported customer and you put in a feature request, you just say Beetlejuice 3 times, and then your request goes to the front of the line. Because normally the way we look at with most open source projects, it's is it critical to the project? Is it a feature applicable for everybody? And we have an upvoting system to be able to do it. But if you have support, it puts you in the front of the line, which is kind of nice. All right. So please join us. Join the movement. Join the MDS movement. This is not about, do I use MDM or MDS? MDS really allows you to front load all these resources. It's not applicable for every situation, but I think that it will speed up and make your users happier from that initial get-go and reduce your support tickets. So if you go to twocanoes.com/MDS, that's our product page. It's a great place for us to put links to everything else. So if you just have that one link, you'll have links to everything else. But I do tend to like to do, because of COVID, I built a little home studio in my basement, and I do way too many videos on all these different features as I'm developing them. So we have a YouTube channel. The Mac Admin Slack is pretty active, and folks do a lot of discussions. It's actually taken on a life of its own, but a lot of times I get there and folks have already answered the questions, so I'm very excited about that. And if you want to reach out to me directly, just contact me at info@twocanoes.com or hit me up on Twitter, because I tend to live there as well.